The Buddha Taught by Walpola Rahula. Let's see if we can not cause some suffering by finishing this one. To whomever, you stupid one. Now, you can criticize people, but try to be nice about it. Remonstrated the master. Have you heard me expounding the doctrine in this manner? Haven't I in many ways explained consciousness as arising out of conditions? There is no arising of consciousness without conditions. Then the Buddha went on to explain consciousness in detail. Consciousness is named according to whatever condition through which it arises. On account of the eye and visible forms arises a consciousness. It is called visual consciousness. On account of the ear and sounds arises a consciousness, and it is called auditory consciousness. On account of the nose and odors arises a consciousness, and it is called olfactory consciousness. On account of the tongue and taste arises a consciousness, and it is called gustatory consciousness. On account of the body and tangible objects arises a consciousness, and it is called tactical consciousness. On account of the mind and mind objects, ideas, and thoughts arises a consciousness, and it's called mental consciousness. Now, in yoga, you might want to distinguish between the left eye and the right eye, and the right nostril, left nostril, right ear, left ear. So your difference of your 9 gates kind of are differentiated, right? But it'd be interesting to kind of lay down and interpret life through your 9 holes. Well, eyes are kind of a bump, but then the Buddha, then the Buddha explained it further by an illustration. A fire is named according to the material on account of which it burns. A fire may burn on account of wood, and it is called wood fire. It may burn on account of straw, and then it is called straw fire. So consciousness is named according to the condition through which it arises. Dwelling on this point, Buddha Gosa, the great commentator, explains, a fire that burns on account of wood burns only when there is a supply, but dies down in that very place when the supply is no longer there, because then the condition has changed. But the fire does not cross over to splinters, etc., and become a splinter fire, and so on. Even so, the consciousness that arises on account of the eye and visible forms arises in that gate of the sense organ, i.e. the eye, in the eye only. When there is a condition of the eye, visible forms, light, and attention, but ceases then, and there, when the condition, is no more there, because then the condition has changed, but the consciousness does not cross over to the ear, etc., become auditory consciousness, and so on. The Buddha declared in unequivocal terms that consciousness depends on matter, sensation, perception, and mental formations, and that it cannot exist independently of them. He says consciousness may exist, having matter as its means, repupayam, matter as its object, uparamanam, matter as its support, urupapatitam, and seeking delight, it may grow, increase, and develop. Our consciousness may exist having sensation as its means, our perception as its means, our mental formation as its means, mental formations as its object, mental formations as its support, and seeking delight, it may grow, increase, and develop. Were a man to say, I shall show the coming, the going, and the passing away, the arising, the growing, the increase, or development of consciousness apart from matter, sensation, perception, and mental formations, he would be speaking of something that does not exist. Very briefly, these are the 5 aggregates. What we call a being or an individual, or I, is only a convenient name or label given to the combination of these 5 groups. They are all impermanent, all constantly changing. Whatever is impermanent is dukkha. Yad aniccham tam dukkham. This is the true meaning of the Buddha's words. In brief, the 5 aggregates of attachment are dukkha. They are not the same for the 2 consecutive moments. Here, A is not equal to A. They are in a flux, a momentary arising and disappearing. O Brahmana, it is just like a mountain river flowing far and swift, taking everything along with it. There is no moment, no instant, no second when it stops flowing, but it goes on flowing and continuing. So, Brahmana is human life, like a mountain river. As the Buddha told Walpola, the world is in conscious flux and is impermanent. One thing disappears. Conditioning the appearance of the next series of cause and effect. There's no unchanging substance in them. There's nothing behind them that can be called a permanent self, Atman, individuality, or anything that can in reality be called I. Everyone will agree that neither matter, nor sensation, nor perception, nor any one of those mental activities, nor consciousness can really be called I. But when these 5 physical and mental aggregates, which are independent, are working together in combination, as a physio-psychological machine, we get the idea of I. But this is only a false idea, a mental formation which is nothing more but one of those 52 mental formations of the 4th aggregate which we have discussed, namely, it is the idea of self. Sakaya Ditta. The 5 aggregates together, which we popularly call a being, are dukkha itself. Samkara dukkha. There is no other being, or I, standing between these 5 aggregates who experiences dukkha. The Buddhaghosa says, mere suffering exists, but no sufferer is found. The deeds are, but no doer is found. There is no unmoving mover behind the movement. It is only movement. It is not correct to say that life is moving, but life is movement itself. Life and movement are not 2 different things. In other words, there is no thinker behind the thought. Thought itself is the thinker. If you remove the thought, there is no thinker to be found. Here, we cannot fail to notice how this Buddhist view is diametrically opposed to the Cartesian cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. Now a question may be raised whether life has a beginning, according to Buddhist teachings. The beginning of the life stream of living beings is unthinkable. Okay, the words are attributed to Buddha to a teacher. These words attributed to Buddha to a teacher, Sattva, named Araka, who was free from desires, who lived in the dim past. It is interesting to remember here that the doctrine of Heraclitus, about 500 BCE, that everything is in a state of flux, and his famous statement, you cannot step twice into the same river where fresh water are ever flowing in upon you. The doctrine of anatta, no self, will be discussed in chapter 6. Buddhaghosa compares a being to a wooden mechanism, Daruyanta. The believer in the creation of life by God may be astonished at this reply, that if you were to ask him what is the beginning of God, he would answer without hesitation, God has no beginning, and that he is not astonished at his own reply. The Buddha says, O bhikkhus, this cycle of continuing samsara is without a visible end. Okay, well, that doesn't refute that. And there are a couple statements where it sounds Buddha believes in God, but that part of his life was not important to pass on in, the eyes of his disciples. And the first beginning of beings, wandering and running around, enveloped in ignorance, avidya, and bound down by the fetters of thirst, desire, tanha, is not to be perceived, and further referring to ignorance, which is the main cause of continuity of life, the Buddha states. The first beginning of ignorance, avidya, is not to be perceived in such a way as to postulate that there was no ignorance beyond a certain point. Thus, it is not possible to say that there was no life beyond a certain definitive point. Now, tanha is something that Aleister Crowley became a concept that he thought so very important to focus on it in some work or two. Certain definitive point. This is the meaning of the noble truth of dukkha. It is extremely important to understand this first noble truth clearly, because as the Buddha says, he who sees dukkha also sees the rising of dukkha, is also the cessation of dukkha, who sees also the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. I remember in Nargargal Shlad spoke of Tanakanar. So Tanakanar would be a unity of desire. This, in short, is the meaning of the noble truth of dukkha. It is extremely important to understand this first noble truth clearly, because as the Buddha says, he who sees dukkha sees also the rising of dukkha, sees also cessation of dukkha, and sees also the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. This does not at all make the life of a Buddhist melancholy or sorrowful, as some people wrongfully imagine. On the contrary, a true Buddhist is the happiest of beings. He has no fears or anxieties. He is always calm and serene. He cannot be upset or dismayed by changes or calamities because he sees things as they are. The Buddha was never melancholy or gloomy. He was described as his contemporaries as ever smiling, Mehita Pubamgama. In Buddhist painting and sculpture, the Buddha is always represented with a countenance happy, serene, contented, and compassionate. Never a trace of suffering or agony or pain is to be seen. Buddhist art and architecture, Buddhist temples, never give the impression of gloom or sorrow, but produce an atmosphere of calm and serene joy. And in fact, the Buddha says that he who sees any one of the Four Noble Truths sees the other three as well. These Four Noble Truths are interconnected. There is a statue from Gandhara and also one from Fujian, China, depicting Gautama as an ascetic, emaciated with all his ribs showing, but this was before his enlightenment, when he was submitted himself to the rigorous ascetic practices which he condemned after he became Buddha. Although there is suffering in life, a Buddhist should not be gloomy over it, should not be angry or impatient at it. One of the principal evils in life, according to Buddhism, is repugnance or hatred. Repugnance, pratigga, is explained as ill will with regard to living beings, with regard to suffering, and with regard to things pertaining to suffering. Its function is to produce a basis for happy states and produce a basis for unhappy states and bad conduct. Thus, it is wrong to be impatient at suffering. Being impatient or angry at suffering does not remove it. On the contrary, it adds a little more to one's troubles and aggravates and exacerbates a situation already disagreeable. What is necessary is not anger or impatience, but the understanding of the question of suffering, how it comes about, and how to get rid of it, and then to work according to patience, intelligence, determination, and energy. There are two ancient Buddhist texts called the Therigatha and the Therigatha, which are full of the joyful utterances of the Buddha's disciples, both male and female, who found peace and happiness in life through his teachings. The king of Kosala once told the Buddha that unlike many a disciple of other religious systems who looked haggard, coarse, pale, emaciated, and unprepossessing, his disciples were joyful and elated, hatha, bahatta, jubilant and exultant, udag, gudagga, enjoying the spiritual life, abhiratarupa, the faculties pleased, kinitindriya, free from anxiety, apasukha, serene, panaloma, peaceful, paradabhuta, and living with a gazelle's mind, megabhutena, chittasa, i.e., light-hearted. The king added that he believed that this healthy disposition was due to the fact that these venerable ones had certainly realized the great and full significance of the Blessed One's teachings. Buddhism is quite opposed to the melancholic, sorrowful, penitent, gloomy attitude of the mind, which is considered a hindrance to the realization of truth. On the other hand, it is